The beginning of the end. I never thought I would be standing here, staring at the life we built together, watching it fall apart so effortlessly. It all seemed so perfect in the beginning. The laughter, the plans, the late-night talks about our future. But that night, everything changed. That night, I felt the cold grip of reality seep into my heart. The moment he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I don't need you anymore," it was as though the ground had been ripped out from under me. I stood there, paralyzed, feeling as if the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Those words cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way he said them, so cold, so final, as if he had already decided everything for us without even considering how I might feel. I felt as if I no longer mattered to him, no longer had a place in the life we had shared for so many years. The future we had dreamed about together seemed to vanish in an instant. How could this be happening? Just the other day, we were laughing together, making plans for the holidays, talking about the things we would do in the years to come. It seemed impossible that it could change this quickly, that the love I thought we shared could simply vanish with one sentence. But as I looked at his face, there was no trace of regret, no remorse in his eyes. He had made his decision, and there was nothing I could do to change it. His words were like a blow to my chest, knocking the breath out of me. I stood there in complete shock, trying to find the right words to say, to defend myself, to fight for what we had, but nothing came. It was like I had been frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. My thoughts raced as my heart pounded in my chest, but everything felt distant, surreal. I had spent so many years trying to be the person he wanted me to be, trying to be the perfect partner, the one who supported him, who loved him unconditionally. I had given everything to this relationship. And yet, here I was, left standing alone, discarded as if I were nothing. I wanted to scream, to ask him why, to demand an explanation. But in that moment, I realized something that hit me harder than his words. He didn't care anymore. I was no longer a priority to him. I was just another part of his past that he was ready to walk away from. It was a devastating realization, one that made my heart ache in a way I couldn't describe. And so, I stood there in silence, feeling the sting of betrayal and abandonment take root deep within me. But even in that silence, something changed inside of me. Something fierce. Something that would set me on a path I never thought I would take. I knew right then, as I looked at the man I thought I knew, that I would never be the same again. This was the moment my life shifted. This was where it all began, the moment I realized I was no longer going to be the victim of this betrayal. Something inside me snapped. The power I had given him over me was gone. And now, it was time for me to take control. The days that followed were a blur, a cold, suffocating fog that I couldn't escape. It wasn't just the words he said to me that night. It was the silence that followed. I had never experienced anything like it before, the absence of warmth in our home, the distance that stretched between us like a vast, uncrossable chasm. It was as if the very air we breathed had become thick with tension, and every conversation felt like an effort to keep the space between us from growing even larger. I remember waking up the next morning, hoping it had all been some kind of nightmare, a cruel joke my mind had played on me. But when I saw his empty side of the bed, the coldness of the sheets where his warmth used to be, the reality hit me like a punch to the gut. He was already gone. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, he was 1,000 miles away, and I was left here, trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. As the days passed, I tried to reach out to him, tried to talk about what had happened. But every attempt to connect felt like a futile effort. He was closed off, distant, and the more I tried, the more I realized that I was only pushing him further away. His eyes, once full of warmth and affection, now seemed to look through me, as though I no longer existed in the same way I once did. It wasn't just that he was ignoring me, he was actively shutting me out, as if I had become nothing more than an inconvenience, a ghost in the house we had once shared. The conversations we had were no longer about us, about our plans or our dreams. They were hollow, surface-level exchanges about things that didn't matter. I would ask him how his day was, and he would give me the bare minimum response, his tone flat, like he couldn't care less about what I had to say. When we spoke, it felt as though he was looking past me, not even really listening to the words I was saying. It was like I was a stranger in my own home. He started staying out later, working more hours, avoiding the moments when we used to talk, when we used to laugh. There was a hollow emptiness in his absence, a space I didn't know how to fill. And when he did come home, the silence between us was deafening. I would try to make small talk, but it was always met with cold indifference. I could feel the walls he was building around himself, higher and higher, until I could barely see him through the cracks. I began to wonder if he was already seeing someone else, if the emotional distance was just the beginning of a physical separation. The thought plagued my mind, gnawing at me like a dark secret I was too afraid to confront. But every time I tried to ask him, every time I questioned him, he would brush me off with a vague excuse or a change of subject. The truth was, he wasn't even trying to hide his indifference anymore. He had already made up his mind. I was just waiting for the inevitable. It was then that I realized something. I had become a mere spectator in my own life. I was watching him slip away, unable to stop it, unable to understand why. I had given so much of myself to this relationship, and yet, here I was, invisible in his eyes, nothing more than a shadow of the person I once was. This realization hit me hard. I wasn't just being shut out, I was being erased, and in his eyes, I had become a non-entity, a person who no longer mattered. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't going to stand for this. I wasn't going to let him strip me of my dignity, of my sense of self-worth. Something inside me was waking up, and it wasn't going to back down. The heartbreak I didn't expect. It was the kind of betrayal that shatters you, not all at once, but in pieces, small, jagged fragments that you don't even realize are breaking until it's too late. I had spent years believing that the man I married was the one I could trust, the one who would stand by my side no matter what. But the day I uncovered his secret, everything I thought I knew about him, about us, came crashing down. I had been snooping around, yes, but not for the reasons you might think. I wasn't the kind of person who pried into his privacy, but something had changed. His distance, the late nights, the coldness, it was all adding up to something I couldn't ignore anymore. So, when I found his phone one night, casually left on the kitchen counter, I did something I'd never thought I would do. I picked it up. My heart raced in my chest as I unlocked it. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, that I was only looking for answers, for some kind of explanation. But what I found was a betrayal so deep, so cruel, that it made my knees weaken. There, in black and white, were the messages, the texts, the intimate conversations, the plans for secret meetings. He had been seeing someone else. It wasn't just the affair itself that broke me. It was the realization that he had been hiding this from me for so long, that he had been living a double life while I had been standing beside him, believing we were building a future together. How could he do this? How could he look me in the eye every day, tell me he loved me, and then turn around and betray me in the worst possible way? The messages were graphic, yes, but it wasn't the explicit details that haunted me the most. It was the words he had used to justify his actions, the way he spoke about me to her. He didn't see me as his partner anymore. I was just a part of the past, someone he had outgrown, someone he no longer cared about. It was as if everything we had built together meant nothing to him, as if I had never mattered. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands trembled as I read through every word, every sentence. The hurt I felt was indescribable. It wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the deceit, the realization that I had been a fool, blind to the truth that had been sitting right in front of me all along. He had been right there with me, but he wasn't truly with me. He was somewhere else, with someone else, and I had never even known. In that moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me, and I was falling, tumbling into a pit of despair and betrayal. Everything I had trusted, everything I had built my life around, was a lie. I had been living in a fantasy, a bubble that had now burst, and the reality was cruel and unforgiving. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him right then and there, to demand answers, to scream at him for the pain he had caused. But another part of me, a part one didn't recognize, just wanted to shut down. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it, to bury the truth so deep that it would never hurt me again. But I knew I couldn't. This was the truth, and I had no choice but to face it. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, pretending to sleep, I felt a coldness inside me that I had never felt before. I was no longer the woman who trusted him, the woman who believed in our love. I was someone else now, someone who had been shattered, betrayed, and left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. The breaking point. That night, after discovering the truth, I didn't know how to move forward. My world had been flipped upside down, and every thought in my mind seemed clouded by the sting of his betrayal. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, an intense fury I hadn't known existed before. But more than that, there was a quiet, cold sense of realization that settled within me. I couldn't stay in this. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. He had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my sense of self. But what he hadn't taken, what he could never take, was my ability to rise from the ashes. I couldn't act out of pure emotion, though. I wasn't going to make the mistake of confronting him head-on in a fit of rage. No, this had to be different. If I was going to take control of my life again, if I was going to get my revenge, it had to be calculated. It had to be smart. And more than anything, it had to be final. I wasn't just going to hurt him. I was going to make him understand the depth of what he had done. He needed to feel the weight of his actions, just as I had. I began by taking a step back, reflecting on everything. I was no longer the woman who had stood by him, silently bearing the weight of his lies. I had to become someone else, someone who was no longer bound by the pain he had caused. And that meant letting go of the person I used to be, the person who would have just forgiven him, would have just kept quiet and allowed things to fall back into place. I thought of the woman he had been seeing, the one who had been a part of this betrayal. I wanted to know everything about her, every detail. The more I learned about her, the more I realized that she wasn't just an innocent bystander in all of this. She was just as complicit as he was, playing a role in destroying the life we had shared. She was a part of this mess, and she, too, needed to face the consequences of her actions. But I wouldn't go after her directly. No, that wouldn't be my focus. My focus would be him, the man who had promised me the world and then turned his back on me without a second thought. I spent hours, days, even weeks, quietly planning my every move. I gathered information about him, about his business, about his habits. I knew where he was vulnerable, where his secrets lay. And I made sure I had all the pieces in place before I made my next move. I wasn't going to rush this. I wanted him to feel the weight of the truth, to see just how wrong he had been, to understand that he couldn't just walk away from me and expect me to disappear into the background. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if this was the right path. Was revenge worth it? Was it healthy to harbor this anger, this desire for payback? But then I remembered everything he had done to me, the lies, the betrayal, the way he had treated me like I was nothing. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about justice. I had been wronged, and it was time to make things right, not for him, but for me. I needed to reclaim my power, to show him that he couldn't just treat me like a discarded object. I had worth. And it was time to make him see that. The plan I had in place was methodical, precise. It wasn't just going to be about hurting him, it was about making him understand, making him feel what I had felt, even if just for a moment. This wasn't about ending his life, about destroying everything he had built. It was about taking him down a notch, about showing him that his actions had consequences, that I was not someone to be forgotten or dismissed so easily. It was time to make my move. As the days stretched on, I kept up the charade. To the outside world, everything seemed normal. I smiled when I had to, spoke when spoken to, and went about my days with an eerie calm. But inside, there was a storm brewing, a quiet fury that simmered just beneath the surface. Every little interaction with him felt like a calculated move, each word I spoke, each glance I made, part of a larger plan that only I knew about. It was almost like a game I had to play carefully, knowing that every action I took could either bring me closer to victory or unravel everything I had worked for. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I had to remain composed, focused. I couldn't let him suspect a thing. If he even got the slightest inkling of what I was planning, the whole thing could fall apart. And I wasn't going to let that happen. The house felt different now. It was still the same place we had shared memories, laughter, and dreams, but it had become a battleground in my mind. I could see the subtle signs of his guilt, The way he would quickly hide his phone when I walked into the room, the way he would try to avoid my eyes during conversations. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I knew that the element of surprise was my greatest weapon. If he suspected I knew anything, if he knew that I was aware of his betrayal, he would do whatever he could to stop me. He wouldn't be the same man. He would be cautious, guarded, and I couldn't afford that. So, I waited. I waited for the perfect moment to strike, the moment when I had everything I needed in place. The first part of my plan was simple: gather information. Every day, I dug a little deeper, piecing together the clues, filling in the gaps. I started following him, watching his movements, keeping track of where he went, when he was supposed to be at work, and when he wasn't. I began to understand his routine, his habits, the things he thought were inconspicuous. But to me, they were all pieces of a puzzle I was determined to solve. At the same time, I began to build my case. I started looking through his finances, his emails, his social media. Every secret he had tried so hard to keep from me, I was uncovering. I knew his weaknesses, his lies, his attempts to keep his two lives separate. The more I learned, the more determined I became. This wasn't just about exposing his affair anymore. It was about exposing the truth of who he had become, the man who had once promised me forever, only to break that promise so carelessly. But there were moments, fleeting moments, when doubt crept in. I'd hear a familiar song playing on the radio, and I'd remember the times we danced together, carefree, in our living room. I'd see him in passing, and for a split second, I'd want to believe that maybe he still cared, that maybe he would change. But then I'd remember the betrayal, the lies, and the pain. And the anger would return, stronger than ever. I couldn't afford to let myself be weak. I couldn't afford to give him any more chances, to let him slip back into my life. He had made his choice, and now, it was my turn to make mine. The more I uncovered, the more I saw how far he had gone to deceive me. He had no idea what was coming. I had every tool at my disposal now. His secrets were mine, and it was time to make him face them. The tension was mounting, and I could feel it every day. It was like the calm before a storm, the quiet moments before everything would change. Every fiber of my being was focused on the goal. The plan was in motion. And soon, everything would come to a head. But I couldn't rush it. I had to wait for the perfect moment, the right time to make him feel the weight of his actions. The right time to destroy the life he had built with lies and deception. I knew it was coming. The storm was getting closer. And when it hit, there would be no turning back. It was an ordinary day, or at least, it seemed like it. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue across the living room. He was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone, just like any other evening. And there I was, in the same place I had been for weeks, watching, waiting, biding my time. But today was different. Today, everything was about to change. I had done everything I could to prepare for this moment. I had been patient, methodical, and now, it was time for the truth to come to light. I couldn't keep living in this strange limbo, pretending everything was fine when the reality was that nothing was fine at all. I couldn't let him think he had one, that he could just walk away from me, from the life we had built together, without consequences. I had already set the stage. I had planned every move carefully, making sure that when I confronted him, there would be no escape. No lies he could hide behind. No excuses he could make. It was going to be the truth, raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. I called him over to the couch, my heart racing in my chest. My hands were steady, but my mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, fear, anticipation. This was it. The moment I had been working for. The moment he would see everything I had discovered. The moment his world would come crashing down. When he sat down beside me, there was a look in his eyes, a look I had seen before. It was the look of someone who thought they were untouchable, someone who thought they had outsmarted me. I hated that look. But more than that, I was determined to wipe it off his face for good. I could feel my pulse quicken as I opened the folder I had prepared, full of the evidence I had gathered. His texts, his emails, the bank transactions that revealed the truth, all of it. It was time to put an end to the lies once and for all. I slid the folder across the coffee table and looked at him. His expression didn't change immediately, but I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew. He knew exactly what I had found, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a crack in his facade. He wasn't as confident now. He wasn't the man who had dismissed me so easily. He was starting to realize that the walls he had built around himself were crumbling. "What's this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But I could hear the tension in it, the crack that revealed his fear. I didn't answer him immediately. I let the silence stretch between us, giving him time to think, to feel the weight of the moment. I wanted him to understand what this meant, to understand that there was no going back now. Slowly, I started to speak. "This is the truth you've been hiding from me. The truth you've been living with while I stood by you, thinking everything was fine." His face turned pale. He tried to speak, to make excuses, but I wasn't having it. I had heard enough excuses over the past few weeks, and I wasn't interested in hearing any more. This time, I had the power. This time, I held all the cards. As I laid out everything, every lie, every betrayal, every secret, I could see him begin to unravel. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a mix of anger and regret. But it was too late for that now. I wasn't interested in his apologies. I wasn't interested in hearing how sorry he was. The truth was out, and now he had to face it. The room felt heavy with tension. His attempts to justify himself fell on deaf ears. He was powerless in that moment. All the power he had once held over me, all the control he thought he had, was gone. I had taken it back, piece by piece, and now, in front of me, sat the man who had betrayed me, exposed for who he really was. As I looked at him, I could see the guilt in his eyes, the realization that his actions had consequences. But it was too little, too late. There was no going back. No magic words to undo the pain he had caused. He had shattered my trust, and now, I was the one in control. The tables had turned. The weight of the moment lingered in the air like a thick fog, suffocating everything around us. He sat there, stunned, unable to look me in the eyes. His face had turned pale, his usual confidence stripped away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one in control. I could see the panic in his eyes as he grasped for something to say, something to salvage what little was left of his pride, but nothing came out. The truth was undeniable, and it had caught him off guard in a way that was both satisfying and heartbreaking. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it back quickly, too disgusted by his touch to allow any semblance of affection to linger. The man who had once been the love of my life now felt like a stranger who had broken me beyond repair. He had no right to touch me anymore, no right to try and fix what he had shattered. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice shaky, desperate. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But his words felt empty, hollow. The apology came too late, as though he expected me to simply forgive him because he said he was sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't erase the damage he had caused, the years of lies and deception that had slowly eaten away at our relationship, leaving nothing but an empty shell. Sorry wasn't going to change the truth of what he had done. "Don't," I said, my voice firm, but the pain still seeped through. "Don't give me excuses. Don't tell me you didn't mean it. You made a choice. And now you have to live with the consequences." There was no softening the blow. There was no room for redemption. He had betrayed my trust in the most intimate, heart-wrenching way possible, and nothing he said now could change that. The trust we had once shared, the bond we had spent years building, was gone. And I knew, deep down, that there was no coming back from it. He stood up, pacing back and forth, his hands running through his hair in frustration. I could see the guilt eating him up from the inside, but it didn't move me. For once, I felt nothing but relief. A strange, almost calm satisfaction washed over me as I realized that I had broken free from the emotional prison I had been living in. I no longer felt the need to carry the burden of his mistakes. This was his mess to clean up now, not mine. "I'm sorry," he muttered again, his voice breaking. But it wasn't the apology I needed to hear. It was too little, too late. "I don't want your apology," I replied, my voice steady, but my heart heavy. "I want you to understand the depth of what you did. You took everything I had, my trust, my love, my belief in us. And for what? A fleeting moment of selfishness. You were willing to throw it all away. He stopped pacing and looked at me, finally meeting my gaze. There was no deflection this time, no more pretending. The reality had sunk in for him, just as it had for me. We were both broken, but in different ways. The difference now was that I was the one walking away whole, while he was left with nothing but the wreckage of his actions. I had given him the chance to make things right, to rebuild what we had, but he had thrown that chance away without a second thought. The weight of that realization hit him like a freight train, and I could see the regret in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to undo the past. He stood there in silence, and I could feel the finality of the moment settle between us. It wasn't just the end of our relationship. It was the end of my need for him. I no longer needed to chase after his love, his approval. I had finally found the strength to walk away, to reclaim my life and my peace of mind. "I'm done," I said quietly, but with unwavering certainty. "I'm done being your second choice, your afterthought. I deserve more than this." As I turned to leave, the door closing softly behind me, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I didn't have to stay in this toxic cycle anymore. I didn't have to fight for someone who didn't see my worth. And as the door clicked shut, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was free. The weeks after everything fell apart felt like a blur, a chaotic whirlwind of emotions, decisions, and changes. But slowly, things began to settle. The intensity of the pain and anger I had felt in the aftermath of the betrayal started to fade, replaced by something else. Something unexpected. Peace. I used to think that healing from betrayal was a straight line, that it was something you could just move through, like a storm passing over. But the truth was, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. It was messy. It was painful. But it was also liberating. I learned that healing is not about forgetting what happened. It's about accepting it, understanding that I could not change the past, but I could control how I let it shape my future. The first few days after I left felt strange. I didn't know who I was without him. I had been with him for so long, intertwined in every aspect of my life, that being on my own felt almost foreign. But in that solitude, I began to rediscover myself. I began to remember who I was before I met him. The woman who had dreams, who had ambition, who had a voice. It had been so long since I had listened to that voice, so long since I had thought about what I wanted, what I needed, outside of our relationship. I took the time to focus on myself, to rebuild my life without the shadow of his betrayal looming over me. I spent more time with friends and family, people who had always supported me but whom I had unintentionally neglected while I was caught up in trying to fix something that wasn't meant to be fixed. I rekindled old passions, picked up hobbies I had abandoned, and most importantly, I learned how to be happy on my own. As the months passed, the anger I had once felt began to dissipate, replaced by a calm understanding. I realized that what he had done was a reflection of him, not of me. His actions were rooted in his own insecurities, his own flaws, and they had nothing to do with my worth as a person. I had given him everything I had, but I had neglected the most important thing, myself. The truth was, I had been trying so hard to make him happy, to keep him satisfied, that I had lost sight of who I was. I had forgotten that I was worthy of love, of respect, and of someone who valued me for who I was, not just for what I could give them. But in the aftermath of the betrayal, I found my strength again. I found my self-worth, something that had always been there but had been buried under layers of doubt and fear. I realized that this wasn't just about getting revenge or making him feel the pain I had felt. It wasn't about trying to make him pay for what he had done. No, it was about reclaiming my life. It was about standing up for myself, not letting anyone, not even the person I loved most, take away my sense of worth. It was about learning that I deserved more than what I had settled for. The most important lesson I took from all of this wasn't just about betrayal or revenge. It was about self-love. It was about knowing that I am enough, that I don't need anyone to complete me. I am whole on my own. And no one, not even him, can take that away from me. Looking back now, I can't say I'm grateful for the pain I endured, but I can say that it changed me. It shaped me into someone stronger, someone more resilient. I learned that I am capable of surviving the worst, of moving forward even when everything seems lost. I learned that no matter what happens, I always have the power to rise again. The journey isn't over, of course. Healing takes time, and there will be days when the past tries to creep in. But I know now that I am no longer a victim of someone else's actions. I am the author of my own story, and the best chapters are yet to come. As the months passed, I found myself slipping into a new rhythm. It wasn't a perfect life, and it wasn't without challenges, but it was mine. I was finally living for me, not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. The pieces of my life that had once felt shattered were slowly coming together, not because of anyone else's efforts but because I had learned to take control. The betrayal I had suffered was no longer the defining part of who I was. It had been a chapter, an important one, but it was no longer the whole story. At first, I was terrified. Terrified of moving on, of letting go of the past, of embracing the unknown. But then, one day, I realized that it wasn't the past I was afraid of, it was the future. The future that held so much promise, so much potential, but also uncertainty. But then I thought about all the things I had already overcome, the lies, the heartbreak, the loss, and I realized that I had nothing to fear anymore. I had already faced my darkest moment, and now I was free. Free to live, free to love again, and most importantly, free to be myself. There were still moments of doubt, of course. There were times when I wondered if I could trust again, if I could allow myself to open up to someone new. But with every passing day, I grew stronger. I realized that the pain from the past no longer held any power over me. It was simply a lesson, one I had learned the hard way, but a lesson nonetheless. I took my time. I wasn't in any rush to jump into another relationship, but the thought of it no longer scared me. In fact, for the first time in a long while, the thought of love felt like something beautiful, something worth experiencing. I had learned that love, real love, wasn't about sacrifice or compromise. It was about mutual respect, understanding, and the freedom to be your true self. I wasn't going to settle for anything less than that. As I moved forward, I found myself surrounded by people who lifted me up, who encouraged me to keep going, to keep pursuing the things that made me happy. My friends, my family, they had always been there for me, even when I couldn't see it. I had spent so many years trying to make him happy, to fit into his world, that I had forgotten how important it was to nurture my own happiness. But now, I was finally doing that. I was traveling again, exploring the things that excited me, and slowly but surely, rediscovering the joy I had lost. Every day felt like a new opportunity. An opportunity to grow, to learn, and to love again. It was no longer about what I had lost but about what I had gained. I had gained my freedom, my independence, and most importantly, my self-worth. I had learned that no one could take that away from me, no matter how hard they tried. Looking back now, I can say that I am not the same person I was when all of this began. I am stronger, wiser, and more aware of my own value. The pain I experienced was real, but it didn't define me. What defined me was how I chose to rise from it. What defined me was my resilience, my ability to move forward even when it felt impossible. And so, as I stand here today, I don't see the betrayal anymore. I see the strength, the lessons, and the woman I have become. I am not afraid of what the future holds, because I know that whatever happens, I will always have the strength to face it. And that, more than anything, is what matters. Now, as I sit here reflecting on everything that has happened, the heartache, the betrayal, the anger, and eventually the healing, I realize something profound. The journey I've been on, though painful, has shaped me into a person I never knew I could be. It's easy to get caught up in the past, to let the scars define you, but I've learned that the real strength lies in how you choose to move forward. And for me, that choice was clear. I would no longer let someone else's actions control my happiness. I won't pretend that it's been easy. There are days when I still feel the sting of his betrayal, when the memories creep in, and I wonder why it had to happen the way it did. But then I remind myself of how far I've come, how much I've grown. Every challenge I faced was an opportunity to become stronger, more resilient, and more confident in who I am. And I wouldn't trade that growth for anything. I've learned that healing isn't linear. It doesn't come in neat, tidy packages. Some days are better than others, and that's okay. But each day, I move closer to the person I'm becoming. A person who knows her worth, who understands that she deserves love, respect, and happiness. And most importantly, a person who is no longer afraid to stand on her own 2 feet. For anyone out there who has felt the sting of betrayal, who has been left broken and wondering how to pick up the pieces, I want you to know this. You are not defined by the hurt others cause you. The strength to heal, to rise again, is already inside you. It's in the way you choose to love yourself when the world tries to make you feel small. It's in the way you stand up after you've fallen, even when it feels like the ground is giving way beneath you. In the end, it wasn't revenge or anger that set me free. It was the decision to take back control of my life. It was the realization that I didn't need anyone's validation or approval to feel worthy. I had always been worthy, even when I didn't believe it. And once I accepted that, once I recognized my own value, everything changed. I'm no longer that person who would tolerate betrayal in silence, who would let someone break her without fighting back. I'm a woman who knows what she deserves, who won't settle for less, and who will always choose herself, even if it means walking away from someone who didn't appreciate her. The journey isn't over. It's never truly over. But today, I am at peace. Today, I am free. And that, in itself, is the greatest victory of all.